I didn't leave the original Yooka-Laylee with the highest of opinions. Its design philosophy of Banjo-Tooie, but bigger, but also more insular, left a rough taste in my mouth. And while it went through the motions of a banjo game and had some clever ideas, the execution ultimately felt a bit hollow, and the lizard-bat duo never quite controlled right, compared to the bears, plumbers, dragons, raccoons, and whatever Jack is that came before them. Collection was a chore rather than an incentive to explore. Challenges were repetitive at best and frustrating physics struggles at worst. And ultimately, it didn't seem like Playtonic had a grasp on the elements that brought their classics such acclaim and adoration. That out of the way, we established my stance in not liking the first game? Great. Cause man do I love Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. It's not a game that's an immediate charmer or a personality juggernaut. It's not a game that tries to ape what worked in the past despite referencing it. It's a game that wants to stand on the merits of great gameplay, great level design, and a fantastic soundtrack. And it knocks that out of the park. Every level provides a unique way to capitalize on Yooka and Laylee's abilities. The Yoshi's Island style of recovering your second hit point with valuable abilities attached creates a constant feeling of risk and reward, and the high challenge of the levels are generally fair. Though you could look at the game's centerpiece level, the Impossible Lair, and be forgiven for calling me a liar. The Impossible Lair is difficult, and though it's technically fair, the sheer brutality of the titular level is something that hasn't been seen in a very long time. A testament of endurance that's as rare as it is refreshing. Players are introduced to the Impossible Lair immediately after the tutorial, pitted against the game's main antagonist, Capital B. This first boss fight is honestly pretty easy. Capital B's hitbox is almost always active, making him a fat and easy target to leap on, and his pattern doesn't deviate much from the King K. Rool standard. Dying here would be less from any sort of challenge, and more from making stupid mistakes and trying to recover Laylee. And then you gotta do this. The timing's really tight, you just came out of the tutorial, so this is a huge escalation, and you're not really sure of the tighter finesse of the controls. Yeah, you're probably gonna die here, or maybe here. The crux of the Impossible Lair is its main gimmick. For every level Yooka and Laylee clear, you'll earn a battalion member. This creates a shield that gives you another hit point in the lair, or carries you back to safety if you fall into a bottomless pit. With a maximum of 48 members of the battalion, that's 50 hit points, with the 49th regenerating if you catch Laylee quickly as she flies off. So yeah, alright, yeah, that seems more doable. Go into levels, raise a little army of extra hit points, come back and tackle sections you get progressively better at. Sounds like Kaizo Mario's hard level design, except with more Super Mushroom mulligans if you play more easy levels first. You should just be able to bash your head against it and eventually it'll have to come tumbling down. Seems like any other really hard platforming level, right? Well, there are two key differences that twist that assumption. The first is how the rest of the game is formatted. Unlike how Tropical Freeze is focused on big set-piece moments and telling a slowly escalating narrative through its level design, Yooka-Laylee is based on checkpoint-to-checkpoint challenges and grabbing all the collectibles in between. These range from quills to buy new abilities with, to twit coins to unlock new levels. And in order to bank your bounty, you gotta save your progress at a checkpoint. While not seeming like much, this checkpoint-to-checkpoint gameplay not only expertly translates collectathon gameplay into 2D space, it demands that players improve at individual challenges and aspects of each level they come across. And improve they'll have to. Impossible Lair features some of the tightest, most intricate jumps I've had to tangle with in order to nab its secrets, requiring absolute mastery of Yooka and Laylee's techniques, and preserving Laylee for her character-specific techs instead of just damage boosting through. And yeah, you could just die a bunch and then your checkpoint will warp you ahead. but then you'll miss out on cool rewards ranging from incredibly useful to cool novelties to making the game actively unplayable. Whatever suits your fancy and skill level. These same challenges crop up in the lair itself, but your reward this time isn't these extras, it's survival. Every obstacle that the lair throws at you has an analog in another level. It might not be mixed the same way, there might be more pieces to it in the Impossible Lair and probably a lot more spikes and buzzsaws, but you'll be able to recognize, hey, I know how to do this. I did it in that one level because I really wanted to make the screen look like a Game Boy for some reason. In fact, some of the challenges in these levels are more difficult than their Impossible Lair counterparts, either due to far greater distances between checkpoints, or Laylee leaving after a single hit in regular gameplay, gimping the player's movement options. Broken down bit by bit, the Impossible Lair is actually a pretty reasonable set of challenges, compared to the hardest the Royal Stingdom had to offer before at least. That's where the second nail comes in. The Impossible Lair does not require the constant movement and perfection of other hard or Kaizo levels. Heck, due to the way the battalion is programmed, there has to be constant points for you to catch your breath and assess the challenge ahead. No, what the lair is instead is taxing. There are few obstacles that require one input, just jumping across moving platforms or avoiding an enemy. Often you'll be climbing a wall with spiders while dodging missiles, or avoiding saw blades on an elevator that only rises when you're on the ground, stopping entirely when you jump, or leaping off of enemies trying to maintain your height while spiked platforms rotate in a rhythm. There is always an active element, always something beyond the general rhythm of Yooka's platforming that you have to pay attention to. And that stress can either add up or strike a tunneled player when they least expect it. Gotten used to the tricks thus far? Alright, wise guy, we're adding roll jumps to the conveyor belts and ice physics to the elevators. See if you can handle that. Eventually, you go a second round with capital B, letting a player get used to the patterns established by his first bout, just adding more on top of it. But oops, he says he's going to pull a dirty trick, and he unleashes it, slightly altering the timing of his charge attack so that muscle memory fails you. Many platformers will challenge you to perform a perfect run, to leap from platform to platform flawlessly, to enter a kind of zen where your fingers are so used to the jumps you're making, you can do them almost without thinking. The Impossible Lair does not afford you the time to not think. So many factors are based on the player's position, what enemies they've jumped on or what surface they're standing on, that their mind is constantly engaged, constantly taking in information. And all that leads to mistakes not born of unfair traps or poor reactions, but human error and poor judgment. But hey, you got past the nasty ice section, the terrifying water section, capital B's gut-wrenchingly adequate taunts, and you get to the final stretch. It's the third match with capital B after all, and video game bosses just feel right dying after 3 fights or 3 hits. It might take a few tries, but you've scraped past 2 full gauntlets of levels and now 3 boss fights. You might die to him, you might die right before him, but just a few more tries and... yeah. So the lair shows you, after every attempt, not only the percentage of the lair you've beaten, but leaves a little marker in the level showing you your furthest point of progress. And that's where the most merciless part of the level comes in. It's long, and it doesn't have any checkpoints. Now, we here at Designing 4 love a good final level without checkpoints, but it's very easy to use that as a needless way to troll players. Yeah, it sure is funny the devs put those instant death spikes 75% of the way through the level, but no one's gonna be happy having to replay a level due to something they couldn't react to, or worse, screamed, "I jumped!" at the top of their lungs at. But the Impossible Lair weaves its length into its difficulty so gleefully that it adds to the experience incredibly well. The sheer amount of hit points a player has with the battalion keeps them from dying to some kinda cheap trick. But the lack of said tricks means that all the hits a player takes are gonna be their fault. The constant areas of respite become as much of a curse as they are a blessing. A player able to see how well or poorly they're doing based on their B count, nerves compounding. Maybe they'll try to speed through a section they're sick of, and pay the price as they lose 3 or 4 Bs just trying to salvage a mistake they've made. Hubris, doubt, and carelessness are the most lethal obstacles in the Impossible Lair, far greater than any saw blade could be. And the screams of anguish that a player could have from losing a B to some generic mooks walking slowly back and forth means so much more than those falling to a Kaizo trap, because a player knows one of those is their fault. One of those the entire game before taught them how to handle, and they just failed to apply it. After a third deadly obstacle course filled with trapdoor conveyor belts over buzzsaws and more circular saw patterns than you can shake a stick at, you're treated with a fourth fight against Capital B. After activating traps ranging from a moving floor to moving saws to saying he's using new attacks but actually just using slightly harder versions of his attacks from the last phase, you get a wonderful bit of catharsis mind-controlling your archenemy into a buzzy beatdown. And after beating the final boss, he decides to blow the whole level up and you have 2 minutes to get out. Yep, to top it all off, there's a high-intensity escape sequence. Forget all those little bursts where you could assess the situation earlier. You really have to book it in order to make it out of the lair in time. Nothing in this segment is particularly hard, a few roll jumps in places and big lines of enemies to roll into being the main obstacles, but Yooka's likely to have so few Bs and the lair is so long. A player's heart is incredibly likely to be in their throat. There's no greater tension than the feeling of lost progress, and after coming so far, a quick test of mindless reflexes is not only probably the most terrifying thing a player could experience, but an amazing catharsis after all the careful, thoughtful platforming preceding it. Also, there's this wall of saw blades coming down at the end that you can't pass in time, and I screamed until the floor gave out under it. Fair play, guys, you got me there. And finally, with seconds to spare, you have felled the Impossible Lair. It's pretty easy to design a hard level. Make it so that players have one correct way through a level, limit their ability to heal or power up, maybe remove a few or heck all of the checkpoints so they have to repeat tough sections again and again, put some enemies in unreasonable positions that almost guarantee a hit, add a hammer brother for no real reason, just, be a jerk. Trial and error design that demands either perfect reflexes or foreknowledge of what's to come is easy to test, easy to throw at a player, and pretty entertaining to watch. However, there are times where making a difficult level is, difficult. And that's in finding a balance of themes to present that challenge in. Forcing players to brace for difficult obstacles instead of fearing them. Finding a balance between pressing the advantage and maintaining their power-ups. And trying to get players to ration their mistakes to what they're comfortable with, rather than completely avoid them. Any time that you can get a player to say, "This isn't the run, I messed up too much on this section, I'm resetting," is a good one in my book, as the player is constantly thinking about and engaging with your level design, rather than just pushing forward blindly or dying to the same trap again and again until they get it. The Impossible Lair does this perfectly, presenting a gauntlet of challenges the player is equipped to handle and letting them keep at it, figuring out what parts they can damage boost through and what parts they really need to work on in order to conserve hit points. Yes, it's long. Yes, it's demoralizing being sent back to the beginning. But every single attempt is a learning experience, as much for the player's habits as it is for the level's layout. That sort of connection has become a rarity, and I'm absolutely delighted to see Playtonic use their decades of platformer experience to bring that feeling back to the forefront. They've recreated a long-forgotten blueprint on how to design for endurance.